Good morning. Today we journey to the highest navigable waterway in the world, to Lake Titicaca in Peru, where Muriel Larkin rescued and restored a Victorian steamship originally built on the Thames. We stay in that part of the world with a couple who found Manchester, deep in the Bolivian jungle, and we pursue a Malaysian quest as kung fu expert Nick Hurst reveals the limits of physical and mental endurance he went to when he decided to train and travel with his Grandmaster in Malaysia and China. Nick Hurst was 20 years old when he discovered Kung Fu, the craze that was sweeping the country in the 1990s. 10 years on, he had become a black belt, training with his master in London. But he was restless. Nick was so inspired that he wanted to meet his master's master, so to speak, the elusive Sugong, which means Grand Master. He quit his job in advertising and set off for Malaysia to meet Sugong, a man in his 80s, and ended up staying 3 years or so and travelling with him to Indonesia and China. The result is not just some very impressive kung fu skills, but a book called Sugong, The Life of a Shaolin Grandmaster. Welcome, Nick. What was it that first drew you to kung fu? I mean, it was a craze in the 90s. What was the appeal for you?
I'd actually liked it since I was a kid. I'd seen all these old shows like Monkey and Water Margin and these kind of things.
Sure.
So I'd always liked it from then. I'd then been sporty when I was growing up. I'd then gone to university and grown a bit less sporty, a bit more into beer, and I was getting a bit of a beer belly as a result of it. So I had a friend who also is in the book, who had just started doing the classes. And so it just seemed a good excuse to try it out. I went along, joined him, loved it from the first minute I did it, and that was kind of me obsessed for the next 10 years.
So what was the real appeal? I mean, you could have done rugby training, I don't know, whatever you might have done.
I think because I'd always liked the physical activity of sports, and so there's that element to it.
Yeah.
But there was just something very different about it, because it does have the art side of it, especially kung fu compared to some of the other martial arts. So you do have a kind of, I mean, you're punching and kicking things, but there's still a balletic quality to it. It was the mix of the kind of physicality and kind of some grace as well.
Fantastic. Now, you eventually decided you wanted to meet your master's master, known as Sugong, if I was saying right. Yeah. Why was that? Why did you think that was the next step you needed to take?
It was because marketing, advertising's quite a high-pressure job, and I'd known someone who'd done a sabbatical when I'd first started working, and I thought that I'd like to, that's something I'd like to do later on. So it got to a stage where I felt I'd progressed enough to be able to take that break without it damaging my career.
Yeah.
My mind started wandering to paradise beaches, and then suddenly got pulled by kung fu towards something else, which was because I thought I'd been on a gap year before and I'd done the backpacking kind of thing, so I thought I'd try to do something a little bit different. I loved kung fu. My master's master was in a foreign, exciting country, so I thought, right, I'll give it a go.
So you went to Malaysia and you met the Grandmaster. And what was that first meeting like? What did you make of him?
It was quite scary, because the first thing that happened was that I went over there and he was in China. So I'd gone to Kuala Lumpur because that's where he was supposedly based, but he was a slightly nomadic kind of guy, so he was in China at the time. So
because he was originally from China.
He's originally from China, yeah. So I got there, didn't know what to do, so then I just went off and went to one of these paradise beaches. But finally I got back, and one of his students had told me that he was back in town, so I got taken to meet him. He was in the middle of shouting at a whole group of students when I turned up. He was a kind of bullish, muscular character, incredibly scary. So that was my first impression of him. I was quite scared out of my mind.
So you made this huge trip and you got there and suddenly you met with this frightening... I mean, you were training and I suppose you became steeped in the culture of Malaysia. What was that like?
It's quite an interesting culture, because they've got the Malay population is the largest population, but then there's a significant Chinese and Indian minority as well. Okay. And so because of doing Kung Fu, I got mostly steeped in the Chinese Malaysian culture, which... Yeah, it's quite. I'd lived in Japan before, and I found this was after university. I taught English there, and I found that the more I got to know the Japanese, the more similarities I saw with the English. Whereas with the Chinese, it was completely the opposite. And they were Chinese Malaysian, but still, I think there's some cultural parallels. And with the Chinese, I found that I seemed to understand them at first, and then the more I got to know them, the more I was completely confused by them and these kind of stupefying array of beliefs, superstitions, and just parallel thinking, really.
And as you were becoming more and more literally involved with the kung fu and etc., I mean, presumably you were eating as your fellow students were.
Yes, which was a little bit challenging, because they'd quite often start the day with, it's not a toast kind of culture. So you have, particularly if we'd been training for 2 to 3 hours in the morning, so everyone's a bit hungry. You go to what they call coffee shops, which are actually they serve food with hawker stalls around the edge, and you have these bowls of noodles most often, noodle soups. Not knowing what any of the Chinese signs were saying on the hawker stalls, I just asked them to get me whatever's happening. I tuck in. Tastes pretty good for the most part, but they're these kind of thick, meaty tubes, which I thought, right, I best not be rude and leave anything. I ate them as well, which tasted pretty disgusting. Again, I tried not to show it. Asked at the end what it was, and I get told it's intestines. So at 8:30 in the morning, it's a little much.
Not your best breakfast. And you ended up staying for over 3 years. Were you accepted, or were you always an outsider?
No, I was actually well accepted. I mean, the original idea was that I was just going to go there for about 6 months, and then I was going to come back. And it was only when I heard about kind of Sugong's incredible life that I thought, right, I'll write a book about it, and that's what extended it out. But even from the beginning, the Malaysians are incredibly welcoming. I mean, they can be. When they don't know you, there's no favour shown. But if someone knows you, then I was treated like a guest the whole time I was there. No matter what I did, I try and pay, but no one's letting me pay, and these kind of things. So yeah, they were just a very very nice bunch that did completely take me in, and I was living their lifestyle rather than the expat kind of lifestyle.
You managed to go to China with Sugong, and then eventually, obviously, you said farewell. What was that final meeting like? Very briefly.
It was strange because we'd spent so long together. I'd started off in fear of him, and I was still in fear of him at the end, but we'd become very close towards the end of it. He wasn't very big for the emotional goodbye, so it was quite a brisk goodbye, but at the same time, quite a lot of emotion beneath it all.
So you knew that beneath the surface there was a lot of warmth.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's a scary surface.
And I understand that subsequently he's died, but you had some great times with him. Yeah. Thank you, Nick Hurst, and thanks too to Mariel Larkin, Chris Smith and Liz Peel. Next week we'll be looking at Africa with Travels in a Troubled Continent. Until then, good morning.